welcome to this week's episode of Not D&D, brought to you by EM World Live. I'm your host, Jessica, and excitingly, I am delighted to have this guest with us today. We have Marissa Kelly from Magpie Games. Marissa, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am thrilled to have you here because we're going to be talking about Bluebeard's Bride, which is a wonderful tabletop role-playing game that we're going to talk you through for the next half hour or so. And if you have any questions or I don't ask the right question, you want to know more, if you go to Magpie Games website there, you can check out all the information and pick up a copy for yourself. So Marissa, before we talk about the game, I'm a very nosy person, and I want to know a bit about you, if that's okay. So I always ask guests if they remember the first role-playing game they ever played.
Yeah, I was, like 7 or so, and my dad hacked Traveler for me so that I could play Star Wars with him. So it was a one-player Traveler already sort of messed with so that I could play a little Force Adept running around the galaxy.
Perfect. We love that. And it's so nice because I think a lot of people's first games is Dungeons and Dragons as well. So I'm always interested when somebody's isn't and why that was. So it sounds like your dad was really into games as well. So that was just something really normal for you growing up.
Yeah. And then I had a lot of friends who had kept it up and also role played and stuff. So I was always in some kind of game, and I got the nice thing of being the game master's girlfriend a lot, so I got to have pretty cool characters regularly, so that was
nice. So how did you go from somebody who kind of played a lot of games and enjoyed them to somebody that runs a gaming company and makes games and does all the things you do now?
Yeah, originally Mark and I, my co-founder and the CEO of Magpie, we wanted to make comic books. And we were like, oh, this is really hard. So we switched to RPGs, which is also really hard. But
yeah, I was about to say
it did not completely ease us into this next phase. But if we had known how hard it was, we wouldn't have done it. Just like anything.
Sure.
We both played a lot of role-playing games, and we met playing role-playing games, and Mark had already run a business and I could do some art. So we thought we could start it up pretty easily with me doing a lot of the art, him doing a lot of the writing. And in 2011 is when we started all this. We also moved to Boston that year for college. Mark was in grad school and I finished undergrad. And we went to our first Gen Con where we met a few people, talked to them, networking. Will Highmarch and Daniel Solis introduced us to Kickstarter. They're like, you should go check this out. And so we submitted our Game Chef game, and we did pretty good. And then we went to Kickstarter with it, and we raised $5,000. We were really excited. And Kickstarter was really new. And it wasn't backed by anybody that we knew, which was cool.
That is cool, yeah.
Yeah, and then basically we just kind of kept doing it. And there's no really easy way to get money in role-playing games. So Kickstarter really made it possible for us to get our business going. And I drew our first logo with Sharpie, and we were set.
Amazing. That sounds good. Yeah, I think Kickstarter was so huge for just giving access to so many creators to make it happen. Because like you say, otherwise, if you're just doing conventions and trying to get it into distribution, it can feel, like such a barrier.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad Magpie Games exists because you have many, many amazing games which people can go to the website and check out. But we're here to talk about Bluebeard's Bride today. So people that haven't heard about the game, could you give us an introduction and give us the pitch for it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, Bluebeard's Bride is sort of for me personally, it's my love letter to ghost stories. I really have a passion for storytelling in general, and I find role-playing games are a great way to keep, oral storytelling traditions alive and just keep it really people involved in the hobby, and new people especially are fantastic to hear from. And Bluebeard's Bride is, hopefully a really fun horror, like haunted house game that you get to play with everyone. So I'd say the best way to get into it is when you sit down to play, you have to tell the story of Bluebeard so that everybody's on the same page. So Bluebeard is an old fairy tale with many different versions. And but basically everybody's got to be on the same page for how it starts, middle, and the end of it, because that's sort of the tale that you're playing out. So a lord had all these riches that, anyone could imagine. But he had this like shocking, hideous blue beard. And so he could never be mistaken or ignored. So his namesake of Bluebeard was what he was called. And he was fearsome and known for having an uneven temper, but he'd been married many, many times, and no one quite knew what happened to each of the wives. But there were rumors around town, And one day, while hunting on a humble farmstead, Bluebeard was met by a lovely farmer's daughter. He was smitten by her immediately and was like, "This is my next wife." And the young woman was scared by Bluebeard, but she couldn't really let her family languish in poverty, and thought to herself, well, maybe his beard isn't that blue. Maybe he's not that bad. So Bluebeard married her as soon as possible. He took her home and showed her the mansion that was going to be her home, because she would never have any need to leave the estate ever again, because that was sort of the wife's lot in life at the time. And alas, with his wife still in her wedding gown, he was called away. And before he left, Bluebeard says, "Here are the keys to your home. You can go anywhere you want, explore the home. Everything is yours, but do not use this one key or go into this one room. I forbid you to enter this one room, but everything else is yours. You have full reign of the house, full reign of the servants. It's yours." And the bride promises. He leaves. He was entrapping her, obviously.
Yeah. I was like, why did he give her the key then?
Right.
Yeah.
Curiosity gets the better of her, and she opens this door and sees the horrors of all his former brides mutilated and hung on display. She drops the key in a pool of blood as she hears him coming back up the hallway. She picks it up, and this is where the story has different endings sometimes. Sometimes her mother or her brother saves her, but most often, and in our story, she's killed. He sees the blood smear on the key, knows that she was disobeying him, and murders her and displays her in there as well. So our version is a horror story where you're playing the bride as well. And the structure of the game is like a haunted house game where the bride goes and explores different rooms looking for evidence of what happened to who and why, and then deciding if her husband was responsible for those horrors or if he was not. And that'll set her down the path of either being a faithful bride or a disloyal one. So you're playing the bride is kind of a big part that makes the Bluebeard, is that you have like this big lack of agency. And the bride doesn't even have a name. So
defined by her marriage to a man.
Exactly. Wow. So
what a historical trope.
Yeah, exactly. So the fairy tale is very much like, don't disobey your husband or you'll get what's coming to you.
Of course, I would never.
But this game gives you so much more in horror tropes to explore and to bring to the table that it's really rich, even for replaying and everything. So it's normally a one-shot game that you play. You sit down, light up the candles, draw the curtains so that it's dark and creepy, and then you get to go in. And you're not just playing one character, the bride. You're actually, each player is taking on the roles of different parts of her psyche. And those are referred to as sisters. And so you're not individual people, but rather a facet of the bride's personality, because the bride is a complicated, conflicted woman. She's just doing her best to make sense of the crazy mess that is in front of her. So you get to either be the animus, who is sort of this, has a lot of masculine, fighty instincts, the fatale, who's more of a seductress, the mother, who's more of a protector, the virgin, who's super innocent, or the witch, who, is this magical force within the bride. So you get a key, because you get a whole ring of keys, right? So one of the cool ways that the GM gets to know what you're doing as you go through, and what you may be looking for as a player, is the player gets to describe the key to the door that they want to enter. So they're like, oh, this one's made of wood and not on. So then I describe, as the GM, or the groundskeeper as they're called, what that door looks like. Oh, well, the door is, also wood, and the smell of like animals and like feces and urine is wafting out at you, right? That sort of thing. So now we have like this maybe animal hoarding house, like room that we get to go into. But that's just because that's what the key invoked in me as the groundskeeper. But once you go into a room, the door is shut. You can try and leave, but through magical realism, you're not going to be able to leave until you decide what happened to who and why, and then get your token and decide, once you get enough tokens and one of the tracks fills for faithfulness or disloyalty, then you can go to the final room and decide whether or not you're going to look through the keyhole, whether you're going to go inside. And that is what decides your final fate in the game.
So it's a tragic horror from the very beginning, because I don't imagine there's many happy endings in this story.
Well, yeah, no, there's lots of like epilogue questions for you, so that each player still gets to contribute to their ending. But the kind of horror that we're emulating really relies on a fatalistic sense of like powerlessness. So if you can win the game, it doesn't feel true to this haunted house where you take on the role of a woman who is defined by her lack of agency. So the feeling you would get from a happy ending would probably undermine the premise that we've set up and the principles you established. In a happy story, the lessons that are learned are very different. The bride, for example, might need a name to honor what she's been through, right? And that's just not the kind of like creepy haunted house vibe that we want to keep giving over and over throughout the game.
Amazing. I loved the intro to this, and I'm planning to run it soon myself. When somebody's I'm reasonably new to GMing games. I've been playing for over a decade, but I've only really started running this year. So what sort of guidance would you give to GMs sitting down to run the game for their table?
Yeah, well, if you're familiar with Powered by the Apocalypse games, this is one of those. So it has recognizable PBTA bones, even though the rules are changed a bit to enhance that lack of agency that I was talking about.
What sort of changes are there, just to jump into that before we answer the other questions?
Yeah. So for example, on your playbook, which is one of the sisters that you've taken on, those are very limited in what they can do. You have like a special move that you can do, but otherwise it's pretty small and bite-sized. But the highest bonus you can get to a character is a +1. And in most PBTA games, a +2 is common to have in at least one ability to start, or a +3 as the max. And that adds to a Curwell distribution for the 7 to 9 results and how often you're going to get those. So the lower ceiling of the +1 means that more hits are going to be 7 to 9, which is a complicated, you have to choose something horrible variety rather than the best 10 plus result. And misses will also be more common. And that means the groundskeeper gets to do their moves on top of what the players were doing. So many moves also don't require you to roll dice at all. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when you investigate a mysterious object, you're simply allowed to ask 2 of the 4 available questions. There's no way to miss, but no way to ask more questions either. So, and mostly that's just because when you're not rolling dice, it's because that's not where the uncertainty lives in the story. So we want to roll dice when we're not sure where the outcome will go. And if you're just asking, what do I see? That's not interesting to keep rolling for. And it's really annoying because that's just not where the action, even if you are very limited in what you can do as this woman in this story, it just makes it a lot harder to do things that are that traditional role-playing games would allow you to do. So the moves are, you can care for someone, you can investigate the mysterious object, like I said, you can take stock of the situation, but when you have the wedding ring, which is a turn-based system among the players, you can shiver from fear, tell everybody what you're afraid of. And that can happen at any time that the GM is talking. And they'll be like, it looks like you just shivered from fear. What are you afraid is going to happen? And then what they say can happen, but it's worse.
Yes, and to build on top of that, yeah.
Yeah, you can do a bunch of other things too, but the only fighty move you can make is dirty yourself with violence. So you can't turn to that all the time. It's not always very effective, just like anything else. Like I said, the distribution is going to mean that it's a complicated success more than not, or miss. Mm-hmm. So those are all going to be ways in which it's going to feel a bit more limited in when you're playing a PBTA, and that you have to trigger these things to be able to do an exit move to leave the room at all.
Mm-hmm. What was the reason you chose to base it on, Powered by the Apocalypse? Because there's so many different systems out there. So just wondering what made you feel that was the correct fit for this story.
Yeah, actually, this game came out of a 2014 Hacking as Women event. It was a workshop at Gen Con. Mm-hmm. And I was helping lead the event. And it was designed to show women how easy it was to create role-playing games. Mm-hmm. So during the workshop, I was paired with Sarah and Whitney as their systems coach. Mm-hmm. And the 2 of them came up with the premise of the fairy tale horror game that was used as the Bluebeard story for inspiration. Mm-hmm. And then I walked them through a series of tabletop systems and the core elements of those, game design-wise. And then we felt that based on what they wanted the experience to be, that PBTA was more equipped to do that than some of the other ones. For example, if you're thinking about PBTA and Star Wars, for example, you get I would say Han Solo is much more of a fate character where it's just what he's willing to pay to do what he wants to do, to accomplish what he wants to do. All the trouble that he gets into is mostly because he's just going through it and just not willing to sacrifice a little too much there or there. Whereas Luke is very much more of a Powered by the Apocalypse character. He loses his hand. He finds out that the big bad is his dad. He's just sort of at the whims of his environment a whole lot more. And he suffers a whole lot more consequences as these moves would have snowballed around him, right? So their horror and the way they actually wanted to do a horror game that made people creeped out led us down this road a little bit more. I think a thriller game, for example, one where you're not scared, you're more excited about how creepy it is, that could be a different sort of mechanic. And then basically that was the first time we all really spent substantial time together, and we connected. I was like, hey, do you guys want to actually make this a thing? It's really good.
Yeah.
And we kept in contact and made it a reality.
Amazing. And I'm so glad that happened, because I'm very excited to run this game, as I mentioned. So I'm going to pull us back to the question I was asking before I got stuck in the mechanics of what advice do you have for GMs running this game? Like you mentioned, the tone is quite important to that. So any guidance around that?
Yeah, I would say make sure that everyone has good buy-in. This is going to be a lot easier when you know your players and you can just talk to them easier. If you're a GM who wants to run this at a convention with a bunch of strangers, excuse me, I usually rely on the X card really heavily in both scenarios, and home group or not. And the X card is Safety Mechanic by John Stravopoulos that is basically the conceit is we're all here to have a good time, right? So if one of us isn't having a good time, then we're all creative enough to just push the button and come up with something else. So you just, flag that you're X-carding something. We clarify what it is that needs to change. You don't need to say why. You don't need to explain anything like that. And then since instead of spiders coming down the corners of the ceilings, it's ooze. And then we move on. And that really allows the GM to just push and do things as creepy as possible. So for me, I think you're designing and running it with the intention of scaring people at the table. And fear is a difficult emotion to create in that environment because RPGs are so safe. You're just talking. And like a ghost story, right? So like there are many, like I was talking about, there's many games that make you feel tense or worried for the character, but we wanted to make the players really scared. So part of being one character or one together helps you to keep perspective on yourself and be creeped out yourself. So we need them to feel fear, discomfort deep down in themselves. And that was sort of a guiding principle while designing. But because I was trying to make a system which would make players want to slam their hand down on the X card over and over again. So I want to push as hard as I can all times, because if the GM doesn't think it's scary, the players won't either. So I think it's really important that as you're running the game, for people who are, also familiar with like erotic fiction or something like that, you have to give to be like, it has to be sexy for you to think, like for someone else to think it's sexy. It has to be scary to you. And then you're probably going to scare other people as well. So I'd say give it your all in that, and rely on the players to know their limits. Because if you're worrying all the time about what other people are thinking, it's too much. Like that's too much to keep track of. It's not going to be fun for you. And then there's one little fun thing for groundskeepers, the GM to be able to do. And that's Bluebeard is designed as a one-shot game, but it has this option for continuity with previously played brides appearing in the next game. So as the horror of like one of the rooms can be a previous bride that they ran for someone else or for the table. So I found that this option mostly serves as like an Easter egg for the groundskeeper, something like a little treat for them that no one else might know, like a mini game of sorts. But by the nature of our hobby, many groundskeepers are going to run this game for different groups, and most players won't know that their groundskeeper is calling on a horror inspired by a previous game that they run. Yeah. But once revealed, I found that players get really excited by the idea that their bride will somehow be immortalized through the horrors that they perished under. Like, and it seems to really be a nice way to keep the groundskeeper, like, I don't know, interested and inspired to keep things creepy.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I was gonna ask about the nature of it being a one shot, but you could easily just, because Bluebeard has many brides, so you were this one, but they're gonna keep going, I imagine. Yeah. So I think it's really, a lot of the inspiration, it would be really difficult to talk about this game and not talk about feminism and misogyny. Could you talk a little bit about your intent with creating this game, you and the other creators, regarding those themes?
Yeah, I think personally, the biggest thing that keeps coming up about that in the game as it's been released is that sometimes it really intimidates people that they don't want to run it because they feel like it's a woman's game. So personally, I like to just relieve that tension a bit. Women are people too, and this is a fun haunted house game. If you like horror and you like being creeped out, if you like that kind of creativity that you can create with your friends, like how creepy can this get, like I do personally, then it's going to be a lot more like approachable. There are fun things about horror in general that I think are very, speak to a lot of feminine experiences where, people think you're crazy, they're not believing you, like feeling that you might get by dropping your keys in a car garage and like hearing some footsteps. The music is going to like really enforce that there's something real about that experience in a horror genre in general. And so I think it's a really fun way for RPGs to explore that kind of creepy experience that you can, and those tropes that you can really play on. So with Bluebeard's Bride in particular, obviously we're leaning into the misogynist sort of framework here to perpetuate that sense of lack of agency. The book is written in a tone that's condescending and calls you like darling and stuff like that. Like, and so it's meant to invoke a lot of those feelings that are what those women are supposed to be, so quote unquote, supposed to be feeling. And it's just reinforcing that environment and what they're experiencing is true. And so like the bride has many, facets to her personality, but she's not crazy. She's not schizophrenic. She's just a complicated person. And I think that some of our supplements and stuff let you go into different, like less fairy tale style houses, right? And scenarios, and make it a little bit more modern. But ultimately, I think that the feminine experience in this game just lends itself really well to like a creepy environment that no one really cares that much about you personally.
Yeah. Oh, that's a summary of the feminine experience for everyone listening. Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you so much. I think I've hit most of the questions that I wanted to ask you and talk about in the game. Is there anything else you want to talk about, or any closing words to let people know about Bluebeard's Bride?
No, I think that basically just that. Yeah, I think that it can be kind of an intimidating thing for some people to approach, but just give it a go and take and put into it what you find fun about horror, and I think you'll be surprised by what people give you. So the fun thing about this is it's a one shot, so the barrier to entry is pretty low. If you didn't have a perfect session, that was the whole game. You just try again. You could even have one of the players be the groundskeeper next time do the exact same rooms, but they're going to be totally different because your friend is going to describe the kitchen in a totally different way, and stuff like that. So I think that, it's important to just have fun with it. I think the, spooky season is a great way to get into it and keep it going. So, just, and if you are running it for a bunch of strangers, I know that, like, just lean on those safety tools, I think, and don't take on their issues. So if they're not interested in using the X card, you can find another game for them to play. There's lots of other games. So just, make sure that you can explore the system too, and that it's not just on you to babysit everybody.
Sure. Got it. That makes perfect sense. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing the game. The link is on the screen or in the podcast show notes if you're listening, if you'd like to pick up a copy from Magpie Games. Marissa, thank you so much for coming on and talking about the game. I feel like I have a even more in-depth understanding of it now and feel ready to run it myself. Before you go, I would like to ask you one more question I ask everyone, and it's if you have any recommendations for any other TTRPGs, and the rule is it can't be D&D and it can't be a game that you've made.
Of course, I would say that my go-to other game is definitely Burning Wheel. It's awesome. It has rules that are modular for if you want to get really in deep with, like, having conflicts that are, from range and cover to, verbal debates, or you can just sort of be like, contested role for those if it's not that important to the story at the moment. And the life paths are really great. It's just a lot of fun. I'd also say the One Ring has been really fun for me to be playing. Cute hobbits running around. It's very sweet. If you're looking for something to balance out your
palate cleanser.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, like, Apocalypse World is always a good classic.
Of course. All right. Well, thank you so much, Marissa. Some great recommendations there. And thank you everyone who listened and came along to watch. And we'll be back next week with another TTRPG to tell you all about. Thanks very much. Bye.